exciting and interesting year for us here at St. John the Apostle. Years ago, Dr. Steve Langford developed a really remarkable leadership training, materials for leadership training that were very well done and became very much a part of the fiber of the church. And over the years since I've been your pastor, we've used his stuff, we've used some of my stuff, we've combined stuff, but just about every year we offer leadership training. And it deals with a variety of topics. But I got to tell you that all of you as leaders in this church, whatever role you play, should hold your head high in pride and delight and gratitude for being leaders in a year of incredible change. It thrills me. I talk about it with my colleagues and with my friends. The changes we've been about, the experiments we've undertaken, the risk we've involved in, the new frontier, the accomplishment, the changes, especially this thrilling success with Sunday school and Wednesday night worship. And recently, your ability to stand firm in the midst of a storm that involves some of you. These are exciting examples of spiritual growth. And as a representative of the kingdom, I just feel like the Lord is so proud, and I know I am. And I want this tonight to be a continuation of that kind of growth as we come objectively to hear, to listen, to process, and to explore possibilities to help our church adapt to a rapidly changing culture that, as you often hear, is a moving target and requires constant attention. I have in my hands some outdated leadership rosters. These need to be put in the recycling bin when you're finished tonight. The names, some of them are accurate, some of them aren't. The reason why I'm showing this to you is not because of the specific names, but for you to see, if you're not already familiar with how we are currently structured. Our Council of Stewards, our Council on Ministries, ministry teams for stewardship and finance, personnel, which is staff, parish relations, so on and so forth. If you would like one of these, I'm going to walk out the aisle and hand them to anybody who would like one. But again, they're bum in that they're not accurate with the names. So when the meeting is over, just drop them in the blue recycling bin when you're done. Brad Brittain is our guest tonight. He is the superintendent of the South District of the Central Texas Conference of our annual conference. I never knew there was such an animal as a Brad Brittain, but I did know his daddy, Grady Brittain, who is one of the finest prince-like individuals to ever hold the office of ministry. We all love him, adore him, and respect him. And I've learned in preparing for all of this that Brad is a product of Arlington, a graduate of Martin High School. He shared with me that he visited this church numerous times back during the 1990s. He enjoyed hearing some of its history and some of its progress as we prepared for this event. He's one of the bright young stars of our annual conference, helping navigate through these changing times and these uncharted waters. And when I first began hearing about him, it's through my good buddy Travis Franklin, who is the district superintendent for the North District. And he began sharing that Brad is the one that you need to talk to if you want to talk about some of these innovative structural changes. And initially, we were going to take about 3 leaders down to see him, but at annual conference, when Brad and I visited, he shared that he would just come to us and do a presentation for a larger group. And so this is the night that has come, and we're not here to vote on anything. We're just here to listen and process and learn. Our Board of Trustees has been meeting down the hall in their regular scheduled monthly meeting. I hope they join us here in a minute. They started about 35 minutes ago. But if they don't, we need to all tell them that they missed a life-changing night, okay? Would you join me in welcoming Brad Brittain to come and share with us tonight? Brad, welcome. St. John.
Good evening. It's good to be here. Yeah, I was got here a little early, so I drove by. We moved here in the late 80s and went to 9th grade at Bowles Junior High, and our house is right behind bowls there. So I decided to, hadn't been by the house in forever, so drove down, saw the house there, and there was this big tree in the front yard. And that wasn't a big tree when I was there. I was like, well, trees grow, and it's been a long time. So yeah, it's kind of neat being back. I went to Martin High School and graduated from there, and then went to Stephen F. Austin to school, and then went to work, and then called to the ministry. Went to seminary at Brittain and TCU. And I started out as an associate pastor at Alliance United Methodist in North Fort Worth. Then moved. My first appointment was a 2-point charge, Dawson and Tawakona. And if you don't know where those places are, neither did I. So until I moved, and was there 5 years. Then moved to Mahia, served there for 5 years, and then to Waco, to Central United Methodist Church, and served there 6 years. And then I've been the district superintendent for the South District of our conference the past just over a year. And that district runs just south of Waco to Round Rock. So that's the area that I have. So I've had the opportunity to go and meet lots of different people in the churches and see the things that our churches are doing. And first thing I'll say is that United Methodist Church is wonderful. There's so many good people doing so many good things, and just like you're doing here. Loved hearing from Mark what y'all got going. I know you have a new worship structure on Sunday mornings, and your Sunday school attendance has risen, I know, because of that. You have a Wednesday night, 6:05 to 6:30, right? I saw that on your sign, the digital sign. I was at the light, and I always pay attention when I drive up to a church. Number one, is there a sign where I know it's a church? Number two, can I see anything that's going on, and sitting through that light, I was able to see your worship times on Sunday morning and then the Wednesday night as well very easily. So that was good. So it's neat to hear all that. I'm here tonight to talk about what's called the simplified board model. I'm not here to sell you on it. It's not like I get a trip to Hawaii if I sign up so many churches. So it's not like one of those things. I'm just here to share what it is. And just offer it to you, and then you as a church can talk about it and see if it's something that you might want to explore that would be good for your church. As anything we do in church, the basic question is, when you're trying to decide, do we want to try this or keep doing this, is does it help us fulfill the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ? That is the mission. So whatever it is, that's the litmus test. So as we talk about this, let's think about it in those terms. But I'm going to begin with a prayer, and then we'll have our presentation. God, we thank you for this evening, for your grace in our lives, and most of all for your Son, Jesus Christ. And that is why we're here, because of the grace that you've shown us through him, and you've called us to share him with others. And may you bless our conversation tonight, and may the structure of this church help make more disciples. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. When I was at Central United Methodist in Waco, we actually went to the model I'm about to describe to you. And we implemented it, and we actually did it for 3 years, I believe, before I was moved. So what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about in terms of here's some book somebody wrote that never did it. You've seen that before, I think. Hey, here's an idea. I've never tried it, but why don't you, we did this. Our church size, we had about 300 or so worship, in addition to some other things. So that's kind of the size church Central was. So just to give you an idea. We had, before we went to the simplified board model, we were structured like most United Methodist churches. We had a PPR committee, which is personnel, trustees, finance, lay leadership committee, used to be called the nominations committee, and then our administrative council, our administrative board. What do you call your administrative? Okay, stewards council. Okay. What was recommended to us was to try what's called a simplified board model. And you take all those committees I just mentioned and you roll them into one. So trustees, finance, PPR, aside from lay leadership, that's still separate because you don't want a body nominating itself. Trustees, finance, PPR, all roll together with the council to form this simplified board. They actually called it the single board at the time, but we call it the simplified board model now because you actually have that board plus your lay leadership committee, which nominates that board. Now, most of our United Methodist churches in the past had been under the structure I described previous to this one. How many of you have served on committees, any of those committees I mentioned? Anybody? How many of you have served 3 years on one of those committees and then been called to either come back to that committee or go to another one? Yeah. How many of you were excited about that? No. So we call it the simplified board. We all come together. We did 3-year terms. So, and I'll talk a little bit about how the board functions and those things in a second. But we had 3-year terms with you must rotate off for a year after your 3-year term. The reason we made that a part of our structure is it forced us to develop new leaders in the church. Because what we found was we had the same group of people just playing musical chairs in the committees. And that forced more people to get involved in the leadership of the church and to grow and develop. So over like a 10-year period, if you do it that way, you'll have more people in leadership than you would the other way with more committees. Does that make sense? If you do it that way. So we found that to be good. Spouses were not allowed to serve at the same time on the board. So let's talk about what would a meeting look like. We're all in the room together, right? We had 13 people is how we designed ours. And by the way, you can decide how you want to structure yours as far as the number. We did 13 people plus the pastor. And in a particular meeting, let's say we're having a meeting and we need a new roof for the church. Now, under the other system, what would the process look like? Trustees, right? We'd have a trustee committee that would meet separately, right? There would be a process of getting bids for the new roof, maybe talking to insurance back and forth. Then there'd be communication with the finance committee, right? There'd be some back and forth there. Then finally, at some point, it would make it where? To your stewards council, right? It would make it there and be voted on, approved, and done. Some churches in that structure can do that quite well, and it goes smoothly, and it's wonderful. Others, it takes forever, which could take a shorter amount of time and achieve the same result. So let's say we need a new roof, and we're having our stewards meeting. We have 13 people in there. We're talking through this. We set it up to where we had a team on that board that kind of was a specialist for trustee areas. So we had 3 or 4 people, I think, doing that kind of work. So those people kind of did the legwork for the roof project, brought it back to the whole group. Bam, it was done. Everybody's in the same room, finance, everything. We're all in communication. What if it's a PPR issue? The way we structured that is you designate a certain number of people on that board as your PPR team. You can pull them out if you have to for something serious or a confidential type issue if you need to, or you can just meet together as a whole on something related to PPR. So, for instance, say your church has decided to hire a masseuse. You believe that your people are stressed out, and at the end of each service, you think it'd be a nice thing for your community to have a masseuse in the parking lot. And you need to approve that. What are we going to pay the masseuse? How are we going to interview that process? It all would go through this one group if you wanted to do it that way. The way we set it up is if I was interviewing someone for a position in the church, I'd have 2 or 3 people if I wanted to pick from the board to help me with doing interviews, should I choose to do that, and go at it that way. So, finances. The way we structured the finance portion of this on this board is we had 3 people that were kind of our finance specialists. And we met quarterly, by the way. Once we got this up and going, we physically met quarterly. Now, if we had something that came up in between those quarterly meetings, we would meet, obviously, if we needed to. But each month, everybody on the board would receive a detailed financial statement of the church. So every month. Then at each quarterly meeting, we went into more detail as a group. But those specialists would meet together outside of the group to get things all lined up. So in the meeting itself, we're not taking forever going through every, what are we going to do with the $25 that's left over in this account from 1989, right? You ever been in one of those conversations? So that's how that functions. Now, nominating this group, the question came up for us, and it does for everybody. If you're going to narrow down the number of people serving in these capacities, you need to have people that are committed, that are all in for the church, and that can function well as a team based on their gifts. So the way that we went about it is we met as a lay leadership team to nominate persons to serve to be on this initial team. And our test was to be on this, to be considered for this, you have to display what we ask of people when they join the church and their membership vows, which is what? Support the United Methodist Church with your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. So I looked at those 5, and I'm pretty simple. So what I did was I kind of looked at the church roll, did my own inventory. Do I see these people often and regularly in worship? That's one. Now pray, I can't tell if you're, that's kind of hard to, are you praying right now? Prayers, presence, gifts. It was required that persons be giving to the church. It wasn't a set amount. It wasn't like, well, you got to give this much to be on the board. It was, are you just giving something to support the church in some way? Service. Are persons serving in mission through the church? And then witness. Are these persons willing to share their faith and invite others to be a part of what we're doing in the church? I also looked at, are these people involved in some kind of spiritual growth for them, whether it's a Sunday school class, a Bible study, small group. So those were kind of our 5 tests. So I made a list of 30 people. We called a lay leadership committee meeting, and I said, here's 30 names of people I think would fit this. Do you have any others you'd like to share? And then the group shared more names. Then we talked through it, and we started to think about, all right, if you're building a team, and you're going to have a football team, and you got 11 people on the field, do you want 11 quarterbacks on the field at the same time? Probably not. Somebody's going to get killed, right? You need a line, you need receivers, running backs. So we matched up the gifts with what we knew would be needed as a part of this team. So I had a couple of principals that we had on the first team, and why would I want them on the team, you think? Human resources, right? They were really good with PPR type issues. Trustees, I always wanted that 1 or 2, every church has 1 or 2, maybe more, that knows everything about the building. Knows where all the little things, the quirky things that are about our church buildings, If you can have one of those persons on, that's great. Somebody with some legal background, that's helpful. Trustee type issues. Finance, same thing. So we kind of looked at all that, matched that up. And then we staggered the classes as we started, because we didn't just want to just say, well, here's our group for 3 years and throw them all in at once. We staggered it where we had a third of the class serve for 1 year, a third for 2, and a third for 3. And then by the time you rotate through that, you get to the point where everybody you nominate serves 3 years. So what we did is we asked some of our leaders, hey, would you be willing to just do 1 year, then rotate off for a year, and then come back? And that was a good way to kind of work that out. The advantages to this, for me and our church, were many. One obvious advantage is we had less meetings and were more efficient in getting things done. That was huge. The biggest adjustment in the person who's going to have the biggest adjustment in a church is the pastor initially, because first 6 months or so, I felt guilty for not being up at the church at a committee meeting all the time. It's like, hey, it's Tuesday night and we don't have a meeting. You mean I'm home with my kids, right? In fact, one night I felt so guilty, I just went up to the church and sat in a room for an hour and made coffee, and it's a joke. But anyway, yeah. Yeah. That's one obvious advantage. That's not the reason to go to this, by the way. I talked to some churches, they're like, well, we're tired of meetings and let's go to this so we don't have to meet. That's not the reason to go to it. It's just a good byproduct of it. In fact, I enjoyed the meetings under this structure more than any other committees that I'd been a part of, because what we met on was bigger picture things, and the people who were in the room were committed. We had a covenant that we agreed to, if you're going to serve on this group, where you will be in attendance at the meetings unless you are sick or there's something major going on in your life, you will be at that meeting. And I tell you, it was the best attended ever for me. And it wasn't because of that covenant, it's because of the criteria to even be considered to be on it. These people cared about their church, and they were going to be there. So what I found pastoring in the different churches under the other system, if you have a committee meeting, on any given day, you'd have about half the committee would show up based on schedule, right? Things come up and about half the committee shows up. And usually in every committee, there's 1 or 2 people that make decisions, and the others just kind of go along. So what we did is we said, hey, let's get all these people in the same room. Let's be committed. Let's be together, and let's go. So that's how we went to it, and how it was structured. It is an accountable leadership model. So the pastor is accountable to the mission of the church, and the board holds the pastor accountable to that. So the mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ, and the pastor is responsible for leading the church in doing that, but is accountable to the board. The church staff is accountable to the pastor. So the pastor is responsible for the staff. So if I had an issue with a staff person, I could certainly communicate with the board, especially if it's a major issue, and I did on a couple of occasions. But my job was to lead the staff, and I was evaluated on how I was able to do that. So in the other system, you'd have a PPR committee that would evaluate every staff person, right? You ever do that? Ever been? And that can be difficult because certain positions at a church are more visible than others, and you can evaluate differently. Some staff positions, if you just come to church on Sunday and are in a Sunday school class and you're not up here during the week, there's no way you can know what's going on with that staff person. Who are you going to listen to? Pastor, right? So there's accountability in this model, and that's how it goes. And that's important to know, to have some clear lines of who's accountable to who. And I found that to be real helpful. I said earlier we dealt with bigger picture issues. This is not a board that will call a meeting to vote on a sink is out in one of our children's classrooms, and we have a problem with the sink. And we're not going to spend 30 minutes talking about the sink, right? So we decided to say, let's as a group decide, what do we just want our pastor and staff to just take care of and inform us on? So I'll give you an example. The sink, we actually had that happen at our church. It was like a $200 repair or whatever it was. And we set a dollar limit. I think it was like $500 or less. I was given the authority with the building superintendent to take care of those things without calling everybody up on a Tuesday night to meet about it. And we inform people, through email and those kind of things. You can decide that as a church if you want to consider something like that. Some churches do a structure like that. Others, they feel more comfortable with every single dollar has to be approved through but you get a church to a certain size, if you do that, that's a nightmare. If it's a small church with 15 people, that's one thing, but I found the size church we were, that's just not realistic, and it's very inefficient. So we had that in place. So at our meetings, what did we talk about? In most board meetings I've been a part of in the past, most of the meetings talked about what we did. We'd receive reports on what happened. In this one, you talk about what are we going to do, equally or more than what we've done. So I'll give you an example. You're planning a new mission opportunity for your church, and you're talking through what that might look like. In this board meeting, that would be a wonderful discussion to have. Is this lining up with the vision of our church, and is this a bigger, rather than someone coming in and giving a report on what happened, which you can easily see on a written piece of paper, right? That's why the meetings, to me, were more energizing. It was more of a strategic and policy-making type board than it was what we were used to in the past, just a reporting. You still get reports, but it's a little different. I've just laid a bunch of stuff on you. I have more, but questions that have come up so far. The downsides? A potential downside to this, and we experienced this early on, but I caught it in time. A potential downside is you've gone from all these people that you've involved in the life of your church through these other committees to 13, right? What happens to all these other people that aren't there? We had in place ministry teams, and we developed other ministry teams to involve people in the mission of the church. To give you an example, we had a fall festival that we did in the fall. In the fall, that was redundant. It's been a long day. The bishop's going to love that. I'll say I went to a church and said we did a fall festival in the fall. And we formed a team that planned that, and they just went and they did it and did a great mission with it, and it was wonderful. Had a bunch of people, more people than ever served on that team. And they had time to meet because they didn't have to schedule around everybody's committee meetings, right? The trap you can fall into is if you just go to a smaller group and then you forget about developing other teams of people to serve and to go and do. And you can structure however you want. Whatever teams you want to have, you can have. By discipline, you just have to have these others.
That example, it sounds like you've got your, let's call it your governing board.
Right.
And then when you have a project, at the fall festival, not in the spring.
Yeah, in the fall.
And there was somebody from the board that was maybe responsible for the event and put together a team that went and go and execute.
You could do it that way. That's one way to do it. That's the beauty of this, the flexibility.
And then after that event was over, these folks that were on that special team, they kind of disbanded and, took a vacation for a month or something like that. And then
Then they could jump into something else that might be good for their schedule or interest. And the beauty of this is somebody on that governing board could could be the organizer of that or not. Some things we just had our staff or persons responsible for certain areas, they were in charge of the volunteers for that particular team. Do you have some water back there? Bottled water or? Sorry, allergies are starting to. Other questions?
It's just that you only have 3 people and they all meet in the same room at the same time and throw mud at each other. And I'm being facetious. Right. But, it's
yeah, like on the roof, for instance. Say something happens to the roof and we don't meet for 2 more months because that's not till our quarterly meeting, right? Well, we just call a meeting and meet. It's an emergency type deal. We handle it. We also called in people to meetings. If we needed expertise on something, sorry, I keep going up here and you're having to strain your neck. If we had to call in others to be of help to us for certain issues, we were more than welcome to do that. They may not be voting members of the group, but if there was someone in the church that was the world expert on roofs, if they ever ranked that, let's say this is the #1 person in the world for roofs, we'd be foolish not to invite that person into the conversation, wouldn't we? So we were very intentional about that side of it. Thank you. Oh, great. Oh, great. Thanks. There's no policy on drinks in the sanctuary, is there? Okay, good. I got in trouble once for that. Yeah, I think I had coffee, a little cup of coffee, went in the sanctuary, and somebody said something to me. I was like, yeah, that's going to be real inviting to people who've never been to church. Yeah, nice policy. But anyway, she didn't like that very much. Our meetings were open to anyone in the congregation. So we wanted people to be involved, and they could attend the meetings. We advertised it. We said, if you want to come, come. Now, if it's a confidential type issue, thing that you don't need everybody in there on, we just didn't meet about it until the end of the meeting. We just held that to the end, which that's kind of rare anyway. But guess how many people came to the meetings?
13.
Yep. I didn't have one person show up to the meetings that wasn't on the group, on the board. That was led and directed through the pastor and staff. And depending on the size church you are, that varies. Large churches have a way of operating. Mid-sized churches, which you are, have a way of operating. And small rural churches have a way of operating. That's how we did that. Now, that's not to say that this governing board couldn't. And you'd talk through a lot of this, like, hey, what are we doing in this area? But it's a bigger picture. It's not details. The staff, that's why we have a staff, right? To help lead people into the things. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. When we nominated persons to serve on it, first of all, I led the group in a kind of orientation on how are we going to do this, what's expected. Anyone that serves on that board, it's understood, it's confidential. I mean, it's confidential. It's not just PPR issues. There might be other issues going on in the church that you talk about as a group, and when it needs to stay in the room, it stays in the room. If you pull out your PPR group, it's understood there as well. Now, persons in the church that we invited to come to the meetings who never came, that's fine. But what did we display by offering that? Right. This isn't a small group that's going to just go make some crazy decisions for the church. We want you to know what we're talking about, how we're going. Because one day, guess what? You're going to be serving on this if you stay here long enough, because we got to rotate off, right? Or you could. We communicated what was happening in the church and some of the directions we were looking. We communicated that through newsletter, worship. We had what we called Central Conversations. The name of the church was Central United Methodist, so we called it Central Conversations instead of a town hall meeting. I don't like the town hall name. That says, hey, let's come and fight about something, right? Those angry town hall meetings you see on TV. We called it Central Conversations, and we did that 3 times during the year. And myself, the chair of our board, and then the staff persons would present. We'd have a meal for the congregation. Anybody want to come? Would share and present kind of the bigger picture of what we're doing and what's going on and answer questions. And that was really good because it kind of just another way of saying, here's what's happening and here's the hardest part. One of the hardest parts today about being a pastor in a church is people receive information from so many different sources. It's very difficult to communicate to everyone because people in your own congregation, you'll have somebody in their 20s that's going to get information one way, 40s another, 70s, 80s a completely other way. So you have to communicate everything in different ways in different places. And I've seen it, I've done it. You can communicate it till you're blue in the face, and there's always, I never heard about that, and that's just human. That's just, we have so much coming at us. It happens, but we found that to be good. If we physically got in front of the congregation, here's what's happening, here's what's going on, answer questions, newsletter, public settings like worship, that was big. Let me tell you a little bit more about where we went as a church here. What I saw when I moved to the church was I looked at the newsletter and the bulletin, and there were 1,000 activities on this. Good things. I mean, nothing bad, just people getting together and things happening. And I thought to myself, if I'm a guest coming in, that's overwhelming. Like, you mean if I join this, I have to be that busy? I don't have time for that. I got my kids, right? So we simplified what we were doing as a church and focused narrowly on what we believed, number one, that God wanted us to do as a church, and number two, that we think would be most helpful to people. And that was encouraging people to be a part of worship. I love how you have the Wednesday night option. That is so important now. Do something outside of Sunday morning. That's critical. Worship, a small group and/or Bible study, and then some kind of mission. And we intentionally moved people. When I say move people, we recognize who are those that just come Sunday morning but need to grow maybe in how can we help them take the next step and move to do this? In the past, I've been in churches where it's like, hey, so-and-so's new, let's get them involved. Put them on the trustees or finance committee. Yeah, that's great. Wonderful idea, right? No. Maybe for some, but man, you want to get somebody engaged, invite them to be a part of a small group, Bible study, Hey, we're going to do this mission. So that's what we did. And our mission was to make disciples. The vision, which is how you carry out the mission, ours was loving God, loving people, serving the world. Loving God we thought of as worship. Loving people we thought of as small groups. And serving the world we thought of as missions and outreach. And we moved people. And people enter churches in different places. Not everyone enters through worship. In fact, very often, younger people enter through a group or a mission. And sometimes worship is the last place you'll see somebody connect to a church now. So that was part of what was behind our move to this structure. We still had those activities. You know, we didn't just chunk everything. I didn't go into the ladies. We had a wonderful group of ladies that did crochet and quilting, did some wonderful things. I didn't go in there and say, "You're done, get out." You know, no. That's wonderful. That's good fellowship. It's good. But there were some things we did look at, and we said, you know, we're spending a lot of time and resources on this, and we're not reaching anybody new. And let's talk about it. Sometimes those kind of ministries you can tweak just a little bit to actually reach people through that, if that was the intent of the ministry. Other times, you just have to stop doing that and direct your attention to those that will. And that's hard. I mean, you know, that can be difficult. I have no idea what that is for you. But I know we had them. And there's not a perfect church. It doesn't exist. This model will not, if you decide to go to this, it will not be perfect. There's not and it's not like you're going to switch to this and then immediately they'll be lined up all the way to Green Oaks on Sunday morning to get in your church. That is not the intent of this. But I do believe structured properly, whatever that is for you, it can help you long term in the allocation of your members' time and where they're spending their time, and that does matter. I'll give you an example. Jack in our church, he was on the trustee committee and also served on the board as well. And you know what that can involve sometimes with meetings. Well, we went to the Simplified board, and he was a wonderful member who said, you know what, I'm going to back off for a year. We need some new people to get in leadership, and we need to help develop them, and I'm going to back off. So he did, and he went to his grandson's baseball game on a Tuesday night. He told me the story. He said, you know, I used to be up at the church all the time at these meetings. I went to my grandson's baseball game, and I invited somebody to church in the stands. I was talking to him, and he said, you'll never believe it. They actually came. And I know that's a simple example, but, you know, yeah. What I observe and have lived is we sometimes get in this church bubble, and we don't mean to, it just happens. We get in this church bubble where all our friends, all our time is consumed in the bubble. And where are we getting out and meeting new people to connect? How do you do that? That's a whole other conversation. How do you do that as a church? You know, there's some wonderful ministries. I'll tell you some of the ministries that spawned from when we went to this. We started a special needs sports ministry, special needs children. They played soccer, basketball. They did football at our church. There's over 100 of those kids doing that now through the church. And guess there's a team of people that do that ministry. And I look at that team of people, and it's made up of people where in the past, the only time they ever met was to meet on administrative things in the church and not ministry. And it's so neat to see. Now, let me say this. Administrative stuff in a church is very important, and it's a gift, and it is a ministry. Trust me, it is a ministry. And some people are called to the ministry of administration. But we have to broaden our approach to involve as many people as possible. Other questions on the model itself? Or?
I'm curious about your structure. Like, for you personally, obviously it's going to be different for every church. So you've got like three or four trustees, 3 or 4 finance, 3 or 4 SPR, and then like your lay leaders and then a chair? Or?
Yeah, here's how we had it structured. you have a chair of the board. You have your lay leader is a member of the board by discipline. Also, a lay member to annual conference needs to be a member of the board. So when a church moves to this model, that does not mean that whoever happens to be your lay member at annual conference, well, I guess they're on the board because they're in that position. When we went to it, we opened it up and said, who needs to be on the board? And then we determined, can you do this in this function? Turns out, the person we had as a lay member at annual conference was perfect and would be great on the board. So we just said, so lay leader, lay member at annual conference, the board chair. We had three that were kind of our finance specialists. 4 or so for PPR. And then trustees, I believe we had 3. We also had a big preschool. Do you have a preschool here? Okay, we had a preschool that had about 300 kids, and it's like it was an elementary school is what it was. And I want to tell you, that was a monster. It was good, but there's a lot that goes into that. So we decided our group was not capable of governing the church and that. So we had a separate board that governed the preschool that reported to the board. So yeah. When I talk to churches about this, I always ask if there's a school. So the good thing about this is you can design the numbers around what you think is best for your church. One church in my district that just went to this, they did 5 trustees, 5 PPR, and then they divided the rest up between finance and trustee type positions. It's important to have those trustee positions named, because the legal documents that you'll need to have signed, maybe, say a corporation comes in here and offers you $20 million for just that little plot right there, not the whole thing, but $20 million just for over there. You'd probably do that deal, right? Wow, yes, no. So you'd have to sign for that. So you'd need to have some names legally that you could put down and sign. People ask, how do you actually move to this in a church? The process that we followed is we had informational meetings where we invited the members of the church to come, and we presented the structure to them, and we had it on paper. And here's the structure, and we went through all the possible questions that people might have, similar to what I'm doing with you right now. We did 2 of those informational sessions. We did 2 because we wanted to make sure people had opportunity to come. If you do it just once, people might be left out. So we did it twice. Bunch of people showed up the first time. Hardly anybody showed up the second time. So that meant it passed, right? That's how you tell. It's already done. If they all show up at the first, if you have more at the second than you do at the first, whatever the issue, it's not good. So you do those 2 informational meetings, and then you contact if you want to move to it, you contact your district superintendent who has to preside over a church conference to move to the model. And you'd have a resolution that would line out the new structure, and then you would vote on it as a church. We did that where it was a church conference, which every full member of the church was invited to come and had a vote. And everybody voted yes to move to the model. We had 2 that abstained. So always got to have 2, right? No. I was like, just vote no. It's okay. So anyway, that's how you do it.
Okay, I'm coming from the accounting perspective.
Mm-hmm.
As far as financial controls, we go through those financials basically once a quarter. I'll be honest, that gives me a lot of concern. It's critical that we review those financials on a monthly basis.
Yeah, we did.
It may be too late.
We did monthly. We had a monthly emailed report to the board that was a detailed monthly explanation of each month to the board. Then quarterly, we actually met and had a longer discussion. So the monthly report that we received, which was very detailed, and I recommend that highly. Monthly, however you do it, keep up with what's going on, because like you said, you wait 2 or 3 months in a church sometimes, you can get behind the 8 ball quick on things. So that's how we did it. We also had those, I mentioned the 3 finance persons and our business manager. They met each month putting together that and communicated with me as well. I met with them.
So you had 3 people who were truly reviewing the financials
Yes.
every month.
Every month. And the procedures. We talk about accountability. How's your money counted? How are, the financial controls, making sure those policies are in place, which,
Okay, so that still continues.
yes. In fact, we did a better job of that under this model. I think because we had to talk about it and say, now, how are we going to do that? So we actually did a better job than we did, I think, before. So yeah, when I say meet quarterly on the finances, that is not, well, we have no idea what happened in February and March. I guess we'll find out in April when we meet. And every board member would get it emailed each month. And not just, well, here's the report. It's, here's the report and here are the notes about it, right? And then it was, like I said, very transparent. I said to every member of our church, I said, if you ever have any question about anything financially in our church, you come and you make an appointment with our business manager and our board chair. We invite that.
Okay, so if you've got a meeting and you've got trustees and finance and all of these facets that are giving their reports or what you're going to do, how long is this meeting going to be?
Hour and a half. We met for an hour and a half. And what we found was, since we weren't dealing with so many little detail things that we shouldn't have been dealing with anyway, and when I say that, I mean those conversations of, I'll give you an example. The fall festival, which we held in the fall, there was a conversation at the board meeting, a lengthy conversation about whether it would be brisket or chicken. Now, that was at a previous church I was at. Now, that's a silly, extreme example. At the end of that conversation, I looked around the room and people were like, did God want us to spend our time together in His church talking about brisket? Or ministries that we can read, right? So what we did, we met, and we didn't say, when we started, we didn't say, we're going to meet for an hour and a half. We found that was the time. Hour and a half, we were able to get done what we needed to get done, the big things that we were handling. One time we met for 2 hours, but we had an issue with came up at the school, and it was, stuff happens in churches and things you got to deal with. So, but hour and a half is how long the meeting lasts. Now, it would last, if you operate where it's micromanaging everything, it'd be 4 or 5 hours. It'd be a nightmare. I would never go to this model if you're going to micromanage your church. That's nuts. That'd be crazy.
Is the staff okay with this? Because they're taking on a huge amount of work.
Staff was great because the staff was not told, hey, you go do all this work. The staff, what's the job of a church staff? Facilitate ministry. So, my student minister, we had a college ministry. We got connected with Baylor and college ministry. Her role was to engage our members in that ministry, right? So she had a system set up of people that hosted college students in their homes for Bible study and dinners and those kind of things. It wasn't, hey, Beth, your job is to do all of that. It's your job is to help develop teams and people in the church that will then. So that's how we did. The staff really liked it. Number one, because they knew this is my job and I know what it is now. It's not, right? Now that was our church. That might not work for you. You might have a totally different way of getting things done here. I don't know. That's how we did it. Now, that does not mean it's a staff-driven church. There's a difference in what I'm saying here. We involve, I mean, the laity of the church is engaged. It's not a, hey, I had this idea and y'all go do this. It's encouraging people in the church to share together and form teams around the passion that drives them. In fact, if somebody came to me with an idea to do something, I'd always say, most of the time I'd say, that sounds great. I think that's wonderful. Can you get 2 or 3 more people together and let's talk? And 2 or 3 more people that will actually engage and give it a chance, right? And you know what I found? Almost every single time that something comes up in that way, it works. It works. The things that have failed are the things that I've sat in a staff meeting and said, why don't we do this, Throw that dart up on the wall. Let's do this. Hey, go find somebody to try to get interested in that and then drag them along. And boy, I've been down that road. So, yeah. Other questions?
Disciplinary requirements, how do you get around people who want to be legalistic about this?
And I have a document I can give you for that. You have like the named PPR people that you could technically pull out as a committee. Also the trustees for the legal type, those. Make sure your lay leader is on the board, lay membered annual conference. You have a board chair that's elected, obviously, to do the meetings. I did not run the meetings. The board chair facilitated the meeting. So it.
But in cases like the discipline mandates 5 to 9 people.
Right. When we went to it, we were one of the first to go to it in the conference. And when we went to it, we just had 3. Now we're recommending what you just said, which is the 5. Like for PPR, it's 5 to 9. So we did 5, or we would move to 5. So yes, thank you. That's a good. And I think, and you can look in the discipline, and most churches that go to this, that they just go with the minimum number. So for PPR, for example, it's 5. Why am I holding 2 cups? I'm going to do that.
How many churches are you aware of that are taking on this new model? And how much time does it take to plan it in?
Like I said, we were one of the first to go to it in our conference. The Missouri annual conference actually started this several years ago. 70, I'm good, I got plenty. They had at least half of their churches on this model when it finally got to us. We started it at Central. There are several churches in my district, in the South District, that are on this model now. Every district in our conference has churches actually doing this now. So this is not, this would not be it's not a new thing. It is and it isn't. What was the other part of the question? There was, implementing it. Yeah, I'm actually working with a church in our district. They're having their church conference to approve going to this model the first week of October, and then they're actually going to start it in January. But they started talking about it back in the spring. So what we did at Central is I didn't just get up on a Sunday and say, hey, next Sunday night we're having an informational meeting on this new structure for our church. So y'all come, we're going to meet, and then I'm going to call the DS, and in about 3 weeks we're going to it, right? No. It takes, in a system, as you know, it takes time to process through and make sure questions, talk through, and have conversations. And it's like anything. You have the early adopters they'll go for anything, even the masseuse idea. They'll just, right? Then you have the middle, most people kind of in the middle. They're like, okay, let me hear more. Let's talk about it. And then way over here you have, it could be the $20 million idea for a plot of grass out there, and they'd say no, right? That's every group. So you have that. So you got to allow time for people to process through as a group. So I don't know what that is. For us, it was, I would think if a church started this, like say you started having these conversations like in the spring, you could move to it later in the fall or the first of the next year, depending on the culture of your church. I mean, I don't know. Other churches could move to it quicker and it wouldn't be as big a deal. For your church, what do y'all think? Do you think a longer time to help people process through and come? And obviously you don't just drop it and say, let's go. Any ideas on what a reasonable time would be for you?
Is there a planning outline that's been developed?
Yes.
This is where you should start.
Yep. And the reason I didn't bring a handout is I like to talk through it. And I'll send Mark something later, but I always think it's best if a church on its own designs its own according to what your needs are, not, hey, here it is, do this, right? But I have it lined out with some good specific, all the information you'll need. And I'll give that to you, and you can use that to help plan. But I think it's better if you talk through as a church and say, just talk through all the issues that might come up in this, everything. How the ministry team is going to be formed. Do we want the staff accountable to the pastor, or do we want to evaluate every staff? Things like that. You can talk through that.
When you first started contemplating this and having those conversations, kind of get a ground feeling, were other things going on in the church that might be considered change, and then this is just one more, because there's a point where some folks might say, we're moving too fast on too many things. So it gets back to this,
Right.
how long is it going to take? It's like,
Right.
what else is going on inside the church that might interrupt this from being successful?
Right. The question is, what's going on in your church? Is this, and the timing of introducing something like this? In some cases, if you introduce something at the wrong time, it can be a right idea for your church, but if it's at the wrong time, I'll tell you what was going on in our church. I was moved to Central in 2011, and the church had built the preschool. Big building, had a debt on that preschool. They had a problem with the preschool director, bad stuff, not sending in proper stuff to the IRS, just the school went in the tank. And the church was not able to pay the note on the building, the preschool. The church had, when I arrived, almost $4 million in debt. And thankfully, we had property around the church that we were able to put on the market and sell. We went to this model right in the middle of all of that and having that property for sale. And frankly, after my first month at the church, I got a call from the banker, and I was like, how nice, the banker wants to get to know me, the new pastor, right? And what a great guy. But no, the banker was, so we were literally like, are we going to be able to keep the property? And so we went to this model. That was 2011. We started discussing this later in 2012. Went to it in 2013, right in that time frame. So, but I give you that example because there are different extremes of crisis in a church and change. And for us, everything was blown up, so it worked well because they're like, hey, that's nothing compared to losing the property, right? So I think it's very important as leaders of a church to think, what can a congregation absorb and at what pace as far as change goes? Even if it's good. In fact, that's, yeah.
Any churches that have went to this, did they ever go back?
No, none that I know of. And one thing I said to our church, I said, let's go, if you want to go to it. But by the way, this was through the Healthy Church Initiative process. This was prescribed to us to do. So I didn't just come up with this. It was like, we recommend you do this. And I said, okay, I like it. Let's try it. So I said to the church, let's try it. And we're not going to try it for a month and then throw our hands up. And let's give it a good shot. And if it's not going to work for us, what could we do? Go back to the other way. We'll call another church conference. So, did not need to do that, obviously. And that is not, I'm not knocking the other way, by the way. When I truly say every church needs to think through which is best. Like I said, I don't get a trip to Hawaii if you sign up for this. So if you truly think you function better the other structure, then keep doing that. Or maybe there's something else that's in between. I don't know. Other questions? What do you think about it? And we're not voting, we're just talking. What do you, just your initial time to hear about it? There's questions still, and you've got to look through. You want to see it on paper, I would think. And
are there challenges? We've got, as far as, you shrunk your committees down to 3, 4, whatever, that handle the big picture things. There's still things that has to be done. These individual committee members are having to form teams to handle the more detailed stuff. Is there challenges getting those teams? Have you seen challenges?
it depends on the church. I could see where that could be a challenge, depending on the church.
Right. It sounds like you're just looking for more volunteers, And that's been a challenge in the past.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second, too. I'm glad you brought that up.
I know you said this earlier, but what is the nomination process for the committee members, and what is the vetting process?
The persons who are nominated to serve on the board at Charge Conference, which we have every year in the fall, same as a fall festival. I can't wait to tell that story to the bishop. At the Charge Conference, the nominations to serve on the board are voted on and approved each year, just like we do now. That's the same process. Now the vetting, we did it, and by the way, we communicated this to the church, that we're looking for people who are living the vows that we've committed to be members of the church. I used a silly example of, if I was forming a board to be a basketball board, and half the people who served on the basketball board don't watch basketball or even play, that would be kind of crazy, wouldn't it? So in a church, how on earth can I have people serving in leadership that are not living what we ask people to take a vow at the altar? And I said that to the church, and it wasn't we shifted it to where it went from a culture of, oh great, I got to serve on, the pastor called and I feel guilty, he needs an extra body on the PPR, right? To one of, if you get called to serve on this, it's an honor. You are very well thought of in your leadership in the church. I heard of I didn't do this, but other churches actually had an application that a member would fill out to be considered to serve on it. Which one of the questions on that I liked. First question, why do you want to serve on this board? I never asked anybody that. I was in the old model of I was desperate. If you could fog a window or mirror, if you could fog a mirror, come on, join us, right? Talked about volunteers, getting people engaged and involved. That is a tricky thing, especially now. People, as y'all know, we have 1,000 things that we can be doing, especially people that are younger. And I've found that one-on-one conversations and mentoring, not official, hey, here's your mentor, but bringing people along one-on-one, helping connect. It's a long process, but The day, at least in my experience, the day of just throwing a sign-up sheet in the back and thinking everybody's going to rush to sign up for whatever it is, that's personal invitation and involvement. Well, by the way, you don't have to do the, I remember I said it was 3 years and then you rotate off for a year. You don't have to do that. You know, you can, but we did that to make us develop new leaders. And one thing I did not do well in my ministry early on was I would invite people to be a part of a committee, and I knew what that committee did because, you know, I went to all the meetings and all that. I didn't do a good enough job of explaining to people what we expect of the committee itself and their role. I didn't do a good job of that. So when we went to this model, we talked through in detail of, hey, here's what's expected, here's what we do. And then having that year off, it forced us to develop new leaders. And that's good for the pastor too, because if I had somebody in the church that was really committed and they were great serving on a committee, you think I wanted them to rotate off for a year? No, that's great. Oh, I can't believe they said yes again. Come on, right? It makes the staff and pastor and the whole church develop new leaders because it's so easy just to fall in the trap of, has that been your experience a little bit? Or, I mean, I don't want to assume anything. Maybe it typically is. That's human nature.
Do you see that you would have a problem, you say developing new leaders, if you have a group that's basically 15 or 16 people, and 5 rotate off for a year for the same people coming back in, and so it's, or when you say rotate off for a year, were those people dropping off?
Yeah.
Not participate, because it seems like it could be a situation where all of a sudden you create this small.
Right.
It doesn't, kind of runs.
When we went to it, I asked 2 people who I said, we'd love for you to be on this 3 years, but since we're doing it this way, could you just serve a year, then rotate off and then come on for 3? But after that, we were intentional about it. Wasn't serve 3, lay off a year, and then come back and do 3, like it was who's new that we're developing. And intentionally, and we mixed it up. We didn't have brand new people on the whole deal. You know, if you've been on committees in the church, you know that there can be some tough stuff, and you need some people that have been through it to help those who. I was very hesitant to put, if someone's new to the faith, just the Christian faith in general, unless they just begged and said that, they had a vision from God that I had to be on a board, I wouldn't put them on right away because there's some stuff you deal with. They'd be like, man, I didn't know this went on in churches, right? Stuff. Yeah. Other questions? If you think of any others, just feel free to ask Mark, and then if I can't answer it, I can direct you somewhere, and I can give you the information on the layout of it, what we talked about. You'd asked about a sheet. I'm not your district superintendent, so Ben Disney is your district superintendent, and he would be the one that would come out and do the church conference, and he would be in communication with Mark, working through the process. So you got some good stuff going on here. I was visiting earlier about some of the things you're doing. It's kind of neat. What are you most excited about in your church right now? Anybody? Well, when is it? You know what? When I go back, and after I do the DS thing, when I go back into church, I'm going to plan a fall festival in April. I'll invite you.
We're just about to enter pumpkin patch, which is effectively a $500,000 business. And, it's a $500,000 because it's $50,000 in 1 month. So it's a $500,000 multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah. That's how many pumpkins do y'all sell?
2 truckloads.
2 truck? Yeah, and that's a lot of people. We did that at Central a couple years, and some of those are heavy. Some of those big pumpkins.
Talk about surprising. We had a staff member, a brand new staff member 2 years ago, and we needed to get him started by the 30th of September because pumpkins were coming. And by the way, he said, "Oh, we forgot to tell you that you're the COO of this company."
What I like most about we had a corner kind of like y'all have them out on the corner, I'm guessing, out there. I loved it because we said this isn't about selling pumpkins. This is about meeting people and connecting, and I can tell that's why you and man we'd have a postcard thing. We'd every event we'd hand them something to invite them to the next whatever that is. So. Like the pumpkin day, if there was something we were doing in November, like a Thanksgiving thing or Christmas, whatever.
In the middle of our pumpkin patch, we have our fall festival in the fall.
You have a fall festival in the fall in the middle of a pumpkin patch. My wife's going to love this story, by the way.
Well, I'm kind of excited too because we're having a live nativity.
Oh, cool.
It's our first time.
Oh, for live nativity?
Yes.
Neat. Sweet. On the corner. In the winter. Well, yeah, winter. One of the fun parts of my work is coming and talking to churches and getting to see what people are doing. And so it is neat, and you should be excited. Y'all are doing some great things, and it's hard to be the church in this day and time, and it is tough. So the struggles you have, you are not alone. But just know that God is using you and your church and your gifts. And, I was driving up here and I was thinking, Billy Strayhorn was a pastor here when my wife and we had just got married. It was 1996. We lived in an apartment off of Collins Street, and we came here for a time before we moved. And we sat back there, I remember, and Steve Billingsley was the associate pastor at the time, and he took us to lunch after the worship. It was our first time, and he took us to lunch that day, and it was a positive, good experience. And I'm thinking that's just us, one couple that was here briefly. Think of the number of people that this church has impacted through the years. And a lot of the things we'll never know the great things that God's done through us. And so don't ever forget that everything you do has meaning and God can use it and does. So thanks for having me out. Good to be here.